Hello Daily Drafters and welcome to the Lost Caverns of Ixalan limited archetype guide here on the Daily Draft channel. This video will cover all of the limited archetypes, key cards, synergies, and more so that you can effectively prepare for your first draft of the new set when it releases on MTG Arena on Tuesday, November the 14th. Let's go ahead and discover some synergy as we descend into this content. Before we look at our first archetype for this video, let's go over the new and returning mechanics for this set so we have an idea what we are dealing with. And we're going to dive right in with one of the more flavorful new mechanics, Descend. The Descend mechanic can take on a few forms, so let's start with what I believe is the most common form, and that is cards that care whether or not you have descended this turn. In order to descend, you must have a permanent card enter your graveyard from anywhere during that turn. This card can be from discarding it, milling it, or having it die in combat and head to the graveyard. In the case of Broodrage Mycoid here, you get a 1/1 fungus on your end step if you've descended this turn. You might also see Descend in the form of Descend X. Descend X cares about there being X number of permanent cards in your graveyard. Cards with Descend X give you additional abilities or become more powerful when that threshold is met. Didact Echo has Descend 4 and gains Flying as long as there are 4 or more permanent cards in your graveyard. Similarly, if you see a card that has what looks like flavor text that says Fathomless Descent, those cards simply scale with the number of permanent cards in your graveyard, like Song of Stupefaction here. The enchanted permanent gets -X, -O for each permanent card in your graveyard. Finally, some cards care about how many times you've descended this turn, and in order to figure that out, you just count how many permanents were put into your graveyard this turn, and you then have how many times you've descended. The Myco Tyrant gives you an amount of fungus creature tokens on your end step equal to the number of times you've descended this turn. Who knew one word could be so complicated, but hopefully that covers all scenarios for Descend. The next mechanic that we'll take a look at is Discover. It looks like Wizards might have tried to fix Cascade with Discover, so what exactly does it do? Well, when you're instructed to discover X, you begin by exiling cards from the top of your library one at a time until you exile a non-land card with mana value X or less. You may then either cast that card without paying its mana cost, or you can put it into your hand. For those of you familiar with Cascade, it's eerily similar, with the main difference being that there is always a fixed number that you're discovering for, which is not always associated with the card's casting cost, and with Discover you have the ability to put that card into your hand instead of casting it for free if you prefer. Our next mechanic is Crafting. Craft is yet another twist on transforming double-faced cards, so let's check out the differences here. You will always cast the front side of a craft card, and to activate a craft ability, you need to do 3 things. You first exile the permanent with craft, exile the specified materials, and pay some mana. The materials are whatever is specified after the craft ability and can be found either on your battlefield or in your graveyard. You then pay the mana associated with its cost. As the craft ability resolves, the card with craft will return to the battlefield transformed under your control. In the case of Clay-Fired Bricks here, you'll notice that it has craft with artifact for 5 and 2 white. All you need to do is exile this artifact, and then exile another artifact you control or an artifact from your graveyard. You then return this back to the battlefield as Cosmium Kiln, which is an anthem effect for your creatures that also comes with 2 1/1 colorless gnome artifacts. Now, our main returning mechanic for this set is a mechanic that debuted in original Ixalan, and that is Explore. If a creature you control explores, you first reveal the top card of your library. If the revealed card is a land card, you put that card into your hand. If it's not a land card, you can put a +1/+1 counter on that creature, and you may then put the card back on top of your library or into your graveyard. So, in essence, Explore is both Surveil and Card Draw at the same time, an incredibly powerful modal ability. And speaking of exploring, one of the most common ways you will see it in this set is on map tokens, a brand new type of token making an appearance in Ixalan this time around. Map tokens are simply artifacts that allow you to pay 1 mana, tap it, and sacrifice it to have a creature you control explore at sorcery speed. Now, our final new mechanic is a short one, and that is finality counters. Similarly to how Wizards introduced stun counters to signify keeping something tapped down a few sets ago, finality counters replace the text, "If this creature would die, exile it instead." This is less of an Ixalan specific mechanic, but rather something you'll see in many sets going forward in an effort to declutter the text of the card. One final quick note about a recent announcement by Wizards regarding booster packs. You may have seen that we will soon be moving away from draft boosters and exclusively using what will be called play boosters to draft. But fear not, that change will not be going into effect with Lost Caverns of Ixalan, but rather with the first set release of 2024, Murders at Karlov Manor. I won't go into the details of this announcement here, but when set review season for Karlov Manor comes around, I will be sure to detail the changes for you then. Now that means that when it comes to the collation of draft packs on MTG Arena, we have it incredibly simple this time around. Each Lost Caverns of Ixalan draft booster pack will contain the following: one slot that will contain either a cave land, which is a 70% chance, or a basic land at a 30% chance. And if you're wondering what a cave land is, stick around through this video where I will explain them in context of a couple of archetypes later. You will get 9 commons, 3 uncommons, 1 double-faced card of the common or uncommon rarity, and 1 rare or mythic rare. And that's it. No bonus sheet, no extra rares, no frills, just good old-fashioned draft. Alright, with that look at the mechanics out of the way, let's take a look at the first archetype for today's video, but before we do, we've got a quick message from me. Thanks, me. Set review season is the perfect time to consider supporting the channel via Patreon. We have several tiers over at the Daily Draft Patreon, with rewards including access to my tier lists, early access to content, and lifetime access to the Daily Drafters Discord server. I'm incredibly proud of my continued work on the tier list, and here's an example of what these tier lists look like for Wilds of Eldraine. And as you'll see, I use a traditional A through F rating scale for every single card. I let you know if the card has moved up or down since my last update, of which I update 3 or 4 times every single set, and I give you the ability to hover over every single individual card for a clickable link to the Scryfall link as well. You'll also get access to my common rankings, uncommon rankings, and removal rankings, where I rank every single common, uncommon, and removal spell in the entire format for you. I'm currently working on my Lost Caverns of Ixalan list, as you can see, and will have this released to patrons in the Centaur Courser rewards tier as soon as I'm finished, guaranteed before your pre-release weekend, and guaranteed to be updated with my experiences during my participation in early access before you head to your pre-release. If $5 is a bit too rich for your blood, we have $3 and $1 tiers that come with early access to all of my content and lifetime access to the Daily Drafters Discord server, a great place to hang out and discuss all the happenings of a brand new set. And if a monetary contribution isn't your speed, a subscription to the channel is always enough. And now, back to the set review content. With that out of the way, let's dive into the main event in today's video, the Archetype Guides. I'll now go ahead and run through all 10 color pairs that exist in the Lost Caverns of Ixalan, what the decks care about, their themes, some of the key commons and uncommons for the archetype, and even some rares and mythics that can pull you into the deck as well. And we will begin with Red-White, which is actually advertised as a mid-range deck this time around, with a little bit of a twist that happens to be tapping your own resources. In order to have things to tap on your side of the battlefield, you have to spend the early turns developing your board, which means you can't be too aggressive, which I suppose explains the mid-range tag. But let's check in on our signpost uncommon for the deck, Caparocti Sunborn, which is a 4-mana 4/4 that has a triggered ability whenever it attacks, allowing you to tap 2 untapped artifacts and or creatures you control to discover 3. Some nice extra value on a decently sized body. It looks like it'll be a deck that wants to attack while also generating extra value from your own side of the battlefield. Every synergistic deck needs enablers, so let's start by looking at some of the common and uncommon cards that are ripe for the tapping, beginning with Tinker's Tote, which is a 3-mana artifact that comes with 2 1/1s. That's 3 artifacts on just 1 card. Oltec Cloud Guard is a 4-mana 3/2 flyer that comes with a 1/1, again multiple bodies on 1 card. Volatile Wanderglyph is a 2-mana 2/2 that lets you rummage if it becomes tapped in any way. Attentive Sunscribe is another 2-mana 2/2 that pays you off for tapping it by letting you scry one when you do. And Thousand Moons Infantry is a 3-mana 2/4 that gives you 2 bites at the apple every turn cycle as it untaps itself on your opponent's turn. Some of the payoffs we get for doing all of this tapping include Gold Fury Strider, which is a 5-mana 3/5 with Trample that lets you tap 2 untapped artifacts and or creatures to give a creature +2/+0. Adaptive Gemguard is a 4-mana 3/3 that can do the tapping thing to put a counter on itself. And Sunshot Militia has the same ability to ping your opponent for 1. Some rares and mythics to look out for in this archetype include Sanguine Evangelist, which is a 3-mana 2/1 with Battlecry, but also comes with a 1/1 flyer when it enters or dies, again, multiple bodies on one card. Warden of the Inner Sky lets you tap your artifacts and creatures to put counters on itself and scry 1, and eventually gains flying and vigilance when it's big enough. And Animpakal Thousandth Moon is just a classic red-white aggressive rare that will let you go wide with its ability. Next up we have Blue-White, which combines a couple of themes it's gotten before, and that is the combination of artifacts and control. You are supposedly supposed to buy time with blockers, removal, and life gain while you wait for your powerful artifact synergies to take over in the late game. Our signpost uncommon for the deck, Master's Guide Mural, is a 5-mana artifact that comes with a 4/4 artifact creature, but can also craft with another artifact to turn into Master's Manufactory, which is an artifact that pumps out more 4/4s simply as long as an artifact has entered the battlefield under your control this turn. Let's first take a look at the artifact synergies for the deck at common and uncommon, beginning with Ixalan Landmark, which is just 1 mana for an artifact that can scry 2 and eventually craft itself into Ixalan Levitator, which can spring your other attackers into the air. Tinker's Tote is an artifact that comes with 2 more artifacts for a total of 3. Inverted Iceberg is an artifact that replaces itself and can eventually craft itself into Iceberg Titan, which is just an enormous creature that can tap or untap artifacts when it attacks. Waylaying Pirates can stun an opponent's creature when it ETBs if you control an artifact. Oaken Siren is a cheap flying threat that is also an artifact and even a mana dork for your other artifacts. Oltec Archaeologists can regrow an artifact card from your graveyard to your hand when it enters. Shipwreck Sentry is a cheap and well-statted defender that can eventually attack as long as an artifact entered this turn, and Lodestone Needle has flash and can lock down a creature they control and eventually craft into Guidestone Compass, which is a repeatable explore engine. Some of the ways we can look to control the game with this deck include Eaten by Piranhas, which turns a creature into a 1/1 at instant speed. Soaring Sandwing gains 3 life when it enters, but can be plain cycled early on if you don't have 6 mana yet. Spring-Loaded Sawblades is effectively a deal 5 at instant speed for 2 mana that can eventually craft itself into Blade Wheel Chariot, which is a 5/5 vehicle that is relatively easy to crew. Unlucky Drop is our clunky-ish 4 mana blue removal spell for the format. Petrify is our pacifism variant for the set. And Hurl into History is a high-risk, high-reward counterspell that you have to hold up 5 mana for, but if it gets something good, you're really in business. Some rares and mythics to look out for in this archetype include Fabrication Foundry, which is a 2-mana artifact that is a mana dork for your other artifacts and can even reanimate artifacts from your graveyard. Akal Pakal, First Among Equals, gives you some extra card draw and selection if you're able to have an artifact enter. And Thousand Moons Smithy gives you a scalable creature for 4 mana and has the ability to eventually flip into Barracks of the Thousand, which can continue to pump out more of those creatures. Next up we have Red-Black, which gets to play around with one of the set's main mechanics, and that is Descending Beatdown. It uses removal and aggressively slanted creatures to put your opponent in a sticky situation. Our signpost uncommon for this archetype is Zoyawa Lava Tongue, which is a 2-mana 2/2 with Death Touch that also gives your opponent the option to either sacrifice a permanent or discard a card on your end step as long as you've descended this turn, and if they don't, they lose 3 life. We'll start with some of the Descend synergies for the deck at common and uncommon, beginning with Deep Goblin Skulltaker, which is a 3-mana 2/2 with Menace that can continue to grow as you descend. Deathcap Marionette is a 2-mana 1/1 Death Touch that gives you the option to mill 2 when it enters, enabling your Descend cards. Child of the Volcano is a 4-mana 3/3 trample that can also grow as you descend. And Screaming Phantom is an evasive creature that can descend every turn as long as it has attacks. Some of the aggressive pieces for this deck include Daring Discovery, which effectively makes your creatures unblockable for the turn and discovers 4 on top of that. Watch out for this card in the format. Synapse Necromage is a 3-mana 3-powered attacker that dies into 2 1/1s. Vito's Inquisitor has the ability to grow and gain menace each turn, an annoying attacker for your opponent to deal with. Hotfoot Gnome is a 3-powered creature with haste that can also just grant your future creatures haste too. Ancestor's Aid is a classic combat trick with the upside of giving you a treasure. Bloodthorn Flail is a single mana for an equipment that gives +2/+1 and can even be equipped for 0 mana at the cost of a card in your hand. Fungal Fortitude is a classic combat trick that even enables Descend and returns your creature to the battlefield. And Echo of Dusk is a 2-mana 2/2 that can be a 3/3 lifelinker if you've descended enough. Some rares and mythics to keep an eye out for in this archetype include Breaches, Eager Pillager, which is a 3-mana 3/3 with first strike that even has more upside as it or other pirates you control attack. Inti, Seneschal of the Sun, gives you all sorts of extra value in the form of counters and impulse draw as you attack, something this deck already wants to be doing. And Molten Collapse, which is just 2 mana to kill any creature, and could even nab a smaller permanent as well if you've descended this turn. Next up we have Red-Green, which is our first tribal deck in the format, and it's everyone's favorite, Dinosaurs. Dinos were a key theme in original Ixalan, and they're back here in the Lost Caverns in Gruul. Our signpost uncommon for the deck is Itzquinth, Firstborn of Gishath, which is an aggressively costed 2/3 with haste for just 2 mana, but if you happen to top deck it later in the game and have 2 extra mana laying around, you can also have a dinosaur you control bite a creature they control, some nice late game modality. Now what good would a dino tribal deck be without, well, dinosaurs? At common and uncommon, we have access to Scythe Claw Raptor, which is a 3-mana 4/3 that enormously punishes your opponent, and notably you as well, but who really cares about that, for casting spells on your turn. Panicked Altasaur is a big reach dino that has inevitability attached to it by pinging them for 2 every turn. Pathfinding Axejaw is a 4-mana 4/3 that explores on ETB. Nurturing Bristleback is a 7-mana 5/5 that comes with the 3/3, but also has forest cycling if you don't quite have 7 mana yet. Rampaging Ceratops is a 5-mana 5/4 with Super Menace. Cavern Stomper is a 6-mana 7/7 that scries 2 when it ETBs and also has an evasive ability tacked onto it. Earthshaker Dreadmaw stabs all Colossal Dreadmaw fans right in the heart, as it is a strictly better version of the Timeless Dino. Thrashing Brontoton is the perfect reprint to have here in this set, and Seismic Monstrosaur is our mountain cycler that can help you with some mana flood in the late game. Now what are our payoffs for assembling this prehistoric party? Well, we've got Belligerent Yearling, which is quite clearly the best 3-powered 2-drop ever printed in Magic's history. Burning Sun Cavalry attacks and blocks as a 3/3 as long as you control a dino. Armored Kincaller can gain you some life if you control a dino on the battlefield or in your hand, and Ixali's Lorekeeper is a 1-mana mana dork for your dino spells. Some rares and mythics to keep an eye out for in this archetype include Trumpeting Carnosaur, which is a 6-mana 7/6 with Trample and Discover 5, and if that wasn't enough, it also has the buyout of 3-mana Deal 3 if you don't have 6 mana yet, an incredible bomb. Pugnacious Hammerskull is a 3-mana 6/6, yeah, you heard that right. Now, it stuns itself if you don't control another dino when it attacks, but let's be real, you'll control another dino when it attacks. And Poetic Ingenuity gives you tons of treasure for your dinos attacking, and even gives you more dinos when you cast artifacts. Next up we have Black-Green, which gets a variant on a theme that it's gotten in the past, and one that rarely seems to come together, and in this set it is Descend Grindy. Supposedly you are supposed to stall the board while you fill your graveyard, and once you've descended enough to power up your side, you can start pushing your way through your opponent's defenses. Our signpost uncommon for this archetype is Akawali the Seething Tower, which is a 3-mana 3/3 that scales with your descend count. When you hit 4, it becomes a 5/5 trample, and if you're lucky enough to hit 8, it becomes a 7/7 trample that can't be blocked by more than one creature, a threat that is sure to end the game quite quickly. We'll start with some of the grindy descend synergies at common and uncommon, beginning with Brood Rage Mycoid, which gives you a 1/1 on your end step if you descended this turn. In the Presence of Ages gives you some card advantage and selection while also filling your graveyard. Deep Goblin Skulltaker is a 3 mana 2/2 with Menace that grows as you continue to descend. Stinging Cave Dweller is a cheap Death Toucher that can eventually turn into a really annoying card draw engine if you've descended enough. Mineshaft Spider is a 4 mana 3/4 with reach that gives you the ability to mill 2 cards if you would like, and Deathcap Marionette also gives you the ability to mill 2 cards and fill your graveyard. Now that we've been dirtling around for long enough, how do we win the game? Well, with evasive creatures like Screaming Phantom, which also has Descend synergies, Rampaging Spiketail opens up attacks for you in a serious way while also adding a chunky boy to the board. Cavern Stomper is a 7/7 that can become evasive, and Gargantuan Leech is a 5/5 with lifelink, a surefire way to stabilize a board. Some rares and mythics to keep an eye out for in this archetype include Starving Revenant, which is fine as a 4 mana 4/4, but it has plenty of card draw and life drain upside. Squirming Emergence allows you to reanimate anything for just 3 mana, a rate we rarely see nowadays. And the Myco Tyrant can pump out endless fungus tokens and grow to an enormous size as you continue to descend throughout the game. Next up is Green-White, which is our aggressive deck in the format, focusing on aggression and buffing those creatures to push through. It looks like aggro has changed hands on Ixalan, so let's see if white paired with green has what it takes to keep the format in check, beginning with our Signpost uncommon, Kutzil Malamet Exemplar, which is a 3 mana 3/3 that shuts off your opponent's ability to cast spells during your turn, and even lets you draw cards when your buffed creatures make contact with your opponent's face. Let's start with some of the aggressively slanted creatures for the deck, beginning with Thousand Moons Crackshot, which has the ability to dump some mana into it to tap your opponent's creatures. Malamet Brawler can give a creature trample whenever it attacks. Olmec Cloud Guard is a 3-powered flying creature that also comes with a friend. Iron Paw Aspirant is itself a 2 mana 2/3, or you can distribute the wealth as you see fit. Miner's Guidewing is a 1 mana 1/1 flyer that would love to get suited up with counters and buffs. Kinjali's Dawn Runner is a double striking creature that can grow itself and would love to be grown by your other cards. Malamet Warscribe is a sorcery speed inspiring charge stapled onto a 4/3 body, and Colossodactyl passes the French vanilla test with flying colors. When it comes to the ways to buff your creatures, we have Family Reunion, which gives all of your creatures +1/+1 until end of turn, or can give them all hexproof. Acrobatic Leap is a classic combat trick that you may run if you need to. Deconstruction Hammer is basically a short sword with upside. Staggering Size is yet another combat trick that also provides trample. And Might of the Ancestors can buff one of your creatures every single turn for just 1 card. Some of the rares and mythics to look out for in this archetype include Kutzil's Flanker, and that's a flash creature that has some modality when it enters. Kellen Daring Traveler is a 2 mana 2/3 that has the ability to draw you an extra card, and even comes with an adventure that could give you a couple of map tokens. And Huatli, Poet of Unity, ensures you hit your land drop and can transform herself into Roar of the Fifth People, which is a saga that gives you 2 3/3 dinos, makes them tap for mana in the next turn, tutors a dinosaur, and eventually just lets you win the game. Next up we have Blue-Green, which also gets to play around with one of the set's main mechanics, and that is Explore. While many colors in the format will be exploring, the payoffs seem to be concentrated in Blue-Green this time around, so let's see if our Signpost Uncommon can assist us here with Nikanzil Current Conductor, which is a 2 mana 2/3 that allows you to ramp when you find lands with your explorers, and gets a counter when you find non-lands. It doesn't quite enable your other cards as well, but is self-contained power. In order to explore to our heart's content, we'll first need to find some enablers for the deck, beginning with Brackish Blunder, which is a bounce spell that could potentially give you a map token. Waterwind Scout is a Windrake that also straight up comes with a map token. Glowcap Lantern is a repeated way to explore attached to a piece of equipment. And Spyglass Siren is a 1 mana 1/1 flyer that also comes with a map token. Now, in what ways do we get paid off for all this exploring? Well, Twists and Turns gives you extra scries when you explore and can eventually transform into Mycoid Maze, which is a way to ensure some inevitability in the late game. C-Note Scout is a 1 mana creature that explores when it ETBs. Over the Edge has some modality and can let a creature you control explore twice. Pathfinding Axedraw explores when it ETBs. Explorer's Cache can move around all those +1/+1 counters you've been getting when you explored. River Herald Guide is another creature that explores when it enters the battlefield. Merfolk Cave Diver can become bigger and unblockable as you explore. And River Herald Scout is our final creature that explores when it enters the battlefield. Some rares and mythics to keep an eye out for in this archetype include Jade Light Spelunker, which has the ability to explore an incredible amount of times. Subterranean Schooner can let other creatures explore as it attacks. And Sentinel of the Nameless City can create multiple map tokens for you over the course of the game. Next up is Blue Black, which has a very similar theme to Red Black, but with a distinct twist, and that is Descending Control. While Red Black is more of an aggressive Descend deck, Blue Black plays more on the controlling side of the spectrum. And we have our signpost uncommon, Uchbenbach the Great Mistake, which is a 5-mana 6/4 with Vigilance and Menace. And if you're somehow able to descend 8 at some point in the game, you can pay 6 mana and return him back from the graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on him. Why cast your finisher only once when you could cast him twice? Let's check out some of our controlling descend synergies, beginning with Didact Echo that replaces itself on ETB but also has flying if you've reached Descend 4. Council of Echoes can bounce a creature if you've reached Descend 4. Chart a Course is a nice card draw spell, but can also fill your graveyard if you choose to cast this pre-combat. Another Chance can fill your graveyard and return a couple of creatures back to your hand. Echo of Dusk has the ability to be a 2-mana 3/3 lifelinker if you've crossed the Descend 4 threshold. Frilled Caveworm is a 4-mana 2/5 that can become a 4/5 if you've descended 4. Sage of Days gives you a little bit of card selection while also filling your graveyard. Orazka Puzzle Door can replace itself while also dumping itself and another card into your graveyard. And Marauding Brinefang has island cycling and can put itself into the graveyard for Descend. When it comes to controlling the game, our options include Brackish Blunder, which is a bounce spell with a little bit of map token upside. Deadweight is a removal spell that can also put itself into the graveyard. Bitter Triumph is another incredibly cheap removal spell. Song of Stupefaction is our blue aura-based removal spell for the set that scales with Descend. Join the Dead is our mid-range black removal spell for the set with Descend upside. Hurl into History is the incredibly risky but rewarding counterspell we talked about earlier. Out of Air is another counterspell, but becomes cheaper when it counters creatures. Chupacabra Echo can give you a nice clean 2-for-1 if you have enough permanents in your graveyard. Skullcap Snail is our cheap 2-mana 1/1 creature that makes them get rid of a card from their hand. And Deep Cavern Bat also temporarily gets rid of a card from their hand, but leaves you with the 1/1 flying lifelinker as well. Some rares and mythics to keep an eye out for in this archetype include Whale of the Forgotten, which is some nice modality on a controlling card, and if you're lucky enough to have descended 8, you get all 3. Stalactite Stalker is a 1-mana 1/1 menace that grows as you descend and eventually turns into a removal spell. And Terror Tide takes advantage of all that descending by turning into a nice little board wipe. Next up is Blue-Red, and finally, for about the one time per year where Blue-Red is not Spells Matter, we get a different theme here on Ixalan, and that is Artifact Aggro. Similar to how Blue-White is Artifact Control, Blue-Red will play in the same space, but lean toward the aggressive end of the spectrum. Our signpost uncommon for the archetype is Captain Storm Cosmium Raider, which is a 2-mana 2/2 that lets you put a +1/+1 counter on any pirate you control when an artifact enters the battlefield under your control. Blue-red also happens to be the color pair with the most pirates, so you'll find that its aggressive ability will synergize with the majority of your creatures as well. We'll start with our artifact synergies at common and uncommon, beginning with Brazen Blade Master, which attacks as a 4/4 if you control 2 or more artifacts. Goblin Tomb Raider becomes a 1-mana 2/2 haste if you control an artifact. Oaken Siren is a cheap artifact that flies and is a mana dork for your other artifacts. Shipwreck Sentry is a 2-mana 3/3 that can attack as long as an artifact has entered this turn. And Staunch Crewmate is a 2-mana 2/1 that can draw an artifact out of your top 4 cards. Now, what about our aggressive cards for the deck? Well, we have Relic's Roar, which can animate an artifact into a 4/3 creature until end of turn. Waterwind Scout is a 3 mana 2/2 flyer that could become a 3/3 if you target it with your map token. Daring Discovery makes your attacks much better and even discovers 4 because why not? Hotfoot Gnome has haste but can also grant your future creatures haste. Pirate Hat gives +1/+1 and can let your equipped creature loot, and can even equip pirates for only 1 mana. Dinotomaton is a 4 mana 4/3 artifact with menace that can give a creature you control menace when it enters. Zoetic Glyph can animate your artifact into a 5/4 and discovers 3 when the glyph goes to the graveyard. And Dowsing Device can buff your creatures when artifacts enter, and as soon as you control 4 or more, you get a Geode Grotto, which can give your creatures an even larger buff and haste based on the number of artifacts you control. Some rares and mythics to keep an eye out for in this deck include the Belligerent, which is a 4 mana 5/5 artifact vehicle that makes treasures when it attacks and plays cards off the top of your library. Saheeli the Sun's Brilliance has all sorts of artifact synergies with her activated ability, and Magmatic Galleon is a removal spell on its front, but leaves behind a 5/5 with Crew 2 and a little bit of extra trinket text. Our last archetype for today's video is Black-White, which gets a theme that it's gotten before, but is usually reserved for Black-Red, and that is Sacrifice. That's right, you Sacrifice lovers, you've got your favorite deck back in Ixalan this time around, and we will see if its Signpost Uncommon can assist that theme in any way, and we find Bartolome del Presidio, which is a 2 mana 2/1 that has a free Sacrifice outlet to sack another creature or artifact to give himself a +1/+1 counter. A slightly weaker ability for limited, but for you constructed folks, you've got yourself yet another 0 mana sack outlet in Black-White. Let's look at some of the ways to enable sacrificing in this archetype, beginning with Tinker's Tote, which comes with 3 pieces of cardboard for just 1 card. Synapse Necromage gives you 2 sacrificable bodies when it dies. Mephitic Drought replaces itself when it enters the battlefield, and also when you sacrifice it. Olmec Cloud Guard is a nice flying body that comes with a little 1/1 waiting to be sacrificed. Miner's Guidewing is a cheap creature that explores whenever it dies. Greedy Freebooter is another cheap creature that gives you a scry and a treasure token when it dies. Envoy of Okanek Ahau can repeatedly pump out 1/1s in the late game for you to continue to sacrifice. And Fanatical Offering draws you 2 cards and gives you a map token at the cost of sacrificing a creature or artifact. So what are some of the payoffs we get for doing all of this sacrificing? Well, Brood Rage Mycoid gives you a 1/1 on your end step if you've descended this turn. Glorifier of Suffering can distribute some +1/+1 counters if you're willing to sacrifice a creature or artifact. Vanguard of the Rose can give itself indestructible if you're willing to throw something else under the bus. Vito's Inquisitor can continue to grow and gain menace as you sacrifice creatures and artifacts. Deep Goblin Skulltaker also continues to grow into a larger threat as you descend. And Acolyte of Aclazotz can tap to sack a creature or artifact to drain your opponent for 1. Some rares and mythics to keep an eye out for in this archetype include Vito Fanatic of Aclazotz, which gives you 2 life whenever you sack a permanent, makes them lose 2 if you do it twice, and if you can do it 3 times in a turn, gives you a 4/3 flyer. Tarian's Journal lets you turn expendable creatures and artifacts into card draw, and can flip itself into the Tomb of Aclazotz, which can reanimate creatures from your graveyard. And Soul of the Lost is our black Tarmogoyf for the set that grows with a number of permanents in your graveyard. Now, I said Black-White would be our final archetype for the day, but as I scanned the full spoiler, I noticed that there might be a special fun deck floating around that I wanted to make you aware of, and that is the Multicolor Caves deck. There's a cycle of 5 cave lands, 1 for each color, that most booster packs will contain at least 1 of. These lands sacrifice themselves for various benefits, but in addition to these 5 common cave lands, there are an additional 2 common cave lands, albeit not particularly exciting ones, but there are also an additional 4 cave lands at uncommon, bringing our total to 11 cave lands in the format, and it tops out at 12 with 1 rare cave land as well. There are a few payoffs for collecting these caves, all at uncommon or greater, and I wanted to share those with you here. First up, Gargantuan Leech becomes cheaper for each cave you control and cave in your graveyard. Scampering Surveyor can tutor up a cave card on ETB. Glimpse the Core can bring a cave back from your graveyard to the battlefield. Sinuous Benthesaur can draw up to 2 cards depending on your cave count. Calamitous Cave-In is a board wipe at uncommon based on your cave count. Bat Colony can give you up to 3 flying bats based on your cave count and even grow them as you play more. Compass Gnome tutors a cave card to the top of your library if you so choose. And Cosmium Confluence can tutor up to 3 caves, put up to 9 +1/+1 counters on a cave, or destroy an enchantment, our only rare payoff. Now, keep an eye out for this deck, it might be a huge player in the format. Thanks so much for sticking around until the end of this video if you're still here. I'm always excited for the release of this video because I know it will be very beneficial to have all of this information in one place so that you have an easy way to find what you need if you wish to revisit the video throughout the week. If you enjoyed this content, feel free to share it with a friend or two, as there's a decent chance they might as well. If you're already subscribed to the channel, thanks for being here today, and if you're not, go ahead and click that subscribe button to stay on top of set review season and have access to consistent, high-quality drafts as soon as the set launches on Arena. Looks like that'll do it for this video, and I'll see you next time here at Daily Draft.